Hi there, I'm Kathleen Jasper, and today I'm going to be going over our good words, bad words strategy with you to help you locate correct answer choices on the exam. This strategy has helped thousands, yes, thousands, pass their certification exams, and we do it in a way so that you can attack those scenario-based questions that give people such difficulty on the exam. By the time that you're done with this video, those scenario questions are going to be the easiest ones on the exam. So let's get started. All right, so I like to go through some of the good words that you should be looking for in the answer choices when you're taking any FTCE exam. Now, these good words are going to be on tests like the professional education test, the K-6 test, or any kind of teacher question test, meaning those questions where you have like a long scenario about teaching and then long answer choices. And it's the kind of question that you say to us, hey, Dr. Jasper, I got this question on the test and I think it could be any one of these answer choices. We get that a lot. No, there is only one correct answer, and knowing the good words and eliminating bad words will help you zero in on that right answer. All right, so let's talk about the good words. Now, the first set of good words you want to think about are standards alignment. If you see the term standards in an answer choice, I am willing to bet that it is correct. Now, stranger things have happened. However, this is a state standardized exam. The state wants to know that you as a teacher are going to be using the standards to plan your instruction, and you should be using the standards to plan your instruction anyways, and that you know that that's where you start. That is the first thing you do. While you might consult with your peer teacher, you might look at the textbook, you might look at professional development or all of those different things, the standards should be the driving document that you use to make instructional decisions in your classroom and for your planning purposes. So make sure you are on the lookout for standards alignment or phrases like use standards to plan instruction. That's going to be the answer every time. The next good word you want to be on the lookout for is data-driven. Now, it may not say data-driven in those exact words in the answer choice, but it may say something like, look at the previous year's test scores, or use observational data to make decisions, or working with your PLC or your team members to look over, assessment scores or assessment data. All of that is data-driven instruction. Now, here's another thing the state wants to make sure you do. The state wants to know that you are not just willy-nilly, prescribing interventions or coming up with strategies on your own. The state and your principal and people like me want you to use data to make instructional decisions. Now, data comes in all shapes and sizes. It could be formal data or quantitative data where it's test scores or how many words per minute a student reads or what his or her reading level is, okay? So that's quantitative data, something that can be quantified. But it can also be qualitative data, which is, observational data, anecdotal notes that you write while you're looking and observing students in the classroom. It could be journal entries. It could be exit slips. It could be a quick thumbs up, thumbs down. That's measuring understanding. It could be any one of those things. So the state wants to know that you are using quantitative and qualitative data to make instructional decisions in the classroom. And standards alignment and data-driven decisions are always at the top of my list when it comes to good words. Those two things alone are probably the most important thing you can do as an educator. Number one, align your instruction objectives and lesson plans to the standards. And number two, using data to make decisions every day in your classroom. And you're doing it. You doing an observation or some sort of formative assessment, that is data-driven decisions. So be on the lookout for that in the answer choices. Another set of good words you should be on the lookout for is differentiated instruction. Remember, you are hired to meet the needs of all students. So you're going to have students who are low-level readers, high-level readers, and everyone in between. Same thing goes for math. There may be low-level math students, high level, and everyone in between. Now, it's important to know that no matter what level they are, students are all unique and have something to bring to the learning. So I hate talking about students in terms of levels because it just reduces them to a number. But we do use levels to kind of differentiate and understand what students need. So differentiated instruction means meeting the needs of all students. And all students is code for all students, high, low, middle, this student's interest is this thing, this student's interest is that thing. You are going to the moon to meet the specific and individual needs of each and every student, and you are prescribing interventions based on those needs. Now, how do you know what those needs are? The data. You use the data to determine what that student needs. And again, that could be a quick observation, or it could be a formal assessment that the student took with the reading coach or, the FSA or whatever your state assessment is, okay? So differentiated instruction, you might see it in terms of helping struggling learners, meeting the needs of all students. All of that means differentiated instruction. And one more word that might be attached to differentiated instruction is scaffolding. Just like on a building, scaffolding in instruction is propping students up so they can better meet the standard. We never lower the standard. We always keep the standard high, but we provide differentiated instruction, accommodations, and scaffolding to boost that student up so the student can meet expectations, okay? So remember that when talking about differentiated instruction. The next set of good words you want to be on the lookout for is anything related to critical thinking or higher order thinking. One of the goals that you should have as an instructor is to boost your students' critical thinking. Recall, memorization, those low-level skills are important. We do use them in school. Of course, they need to start off with, identifying and understanding, but you want to push students to analyzing, evaluating, applying, questioning, those types of skills, because that's where the students are really using their brains and thinking critically about concepts. Now, critical thinking will be on every subject area exam and the professional ed. So if you see teacher questions on, any social science test, elementary ed test, math exam, whatever you're taking, those critical thinking questions are really important, and you want to make sure that you are pushing students towards critical thinking. And you want to be on the lookout for that Bloom's taxonomy and be sure that you're using those high-level Bloom's verbs. Apply, analyze, evaluate, questioning, generating questions, that's critical thinking. Metacognition, thinking about your thinking. So anything that has to do with that higher order, rigor, more cognitive complexity questions, that's what you're going to be looking for in the answers. Another set of good words you want to be on the lookout for is student-centered. Now, it might not say student-centered in the answer choice, but remember, you got to transfer that knowledge and think more broadly. Student-centered means that the students are in charge of their learning. They're invested in their learning. They are actively engaged in the process. So here's what student-centered is not. The teacher standing up in front of the room all the time and just giving knowledge to the students. We call that open the brain, pour in the knowledge, okay? And it doesn't work. Now, do we need lecture type formats, whole group formats in the beginning? Yes. When you are starting off a lesson, when you are modeling a lesson, when you're talking to students initially about something, you definitely want to do whole group, and you are kind of the giver of the information in that situation. But then we want to move to, literature circles, cooperative learning, even individual strategies where students are actively engaged in the planning of their learning, the execution of their learning, and the self-reflection of their learning. So it's about students, not the teacher. And so make sure you're on the lookout for anything in the answer choices. If it says student-centered, it's probably the correct answer, or learner-centered, or anything that has to do with self-selecting books, interest-based, anything where the student is in control of what the student is going to be learning and doing that day. The next set of good words I want you to be on the lookout for is vocabulary in context. Okay. Now you might get vocabulary terms when it comes to content area. So whether you're a social science 612 person or an elementary ed person or anything in between, you might get a vocab question in the teaching scenarios part of your assessment. And this is because the state wants to know that you are using vocab in context. You're not having students copy out of the dictionary. You're not having students just memorize vocabulary words. Instead, they're using it in an authentic way. In context means that the students are learning it as they're using it, which gives it more meaning, which means the students will understand it more. And now I just said the word authentic, which brings me to my next set of good words for the exam, which is authentic or real world learning experiences. Anytime in the answer choice, if you see something that alludes to an authentic experience where students are engaging in the learning, they're applying it to the real world, they're applying it to their lives, that's going to be the answer. Remember, we're dealing with early learners, and abstract concepts can be very confusing. So we need to bring those abstract concepts into the real world. For example, in a social studies class, you might be talking about the Electoral College or voting or something kind of foreign to them. But if you can bring it into current events that are happening today, that'll really help the student. Science, cells and the solar system, all of that is abstract. They can't see it, they can't touch it. But if you can bring it into their lives and even read articles about things like that or bring models into the classroom, get their hands on that information, that's going to help. So anytime you see authentic, real world learning experiences, choose it. It's probably the correct answer. And finally, my last set of good words, which is probably some of the most important, is to be culturally responsive. Now, in every subject area exam, you will most likely get some sort of question about English language learners or ESOL. And remember, we are going to have students from other countries, other ethnicities, other cultures, genders, all of that. So we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all students. Remember, all means all. So we want to be choosing activities that are culturally responsive. Well, what does that mean? That means that our activities are not only providing information about other cultures, but we're also celebrating other cultures, and we're showing students of different races, ethnicities, genders, and things like that in a favorable position, in heroic positions, in leadership positions. Too often it's the dominant culture, the white culture, like me, I see myself everywhere, right? I see myself in commercials. I see myself in books and all of that. It's important that we choose books, activities, and things like that that show others' cultures and other people in those types of roles. And that brings me to one of my favorite examples that I like to use when talking about being culturally responsive. So Whoopi Goldberg, she is an actress, comedian. She's African American, and she tells a story about when she was watching Star Trek as a little girl. Now, up until that point, she had only seen Black characters in submissive roles, or they were maids or, drivers and things like that. And nothing wrong with being a maid or a driver. All work should be honored. But that was the only roles that she saw Black Americans in or Black people in. And so when she saw Star Trek and she saw the character Aurora, and I'm not a Trekkie, but those of you who are know, Aurora is the African-American woman, beautiful woman. She's like in charge of something on the Star Trek. I don't know what it is because I'm not a Trekkie, but I do remember her. And she's in a leadership role and she's running things on this spaceship or whatever you call it. And it was the first time Whoopi Goldberg saw a Black woman in that position. And she ran to her mother and said, Mom, there's a Black lady on TV and she isn't a maid. She's a sci-fi person. She's flying a spaceship. And in that moment, she knew that she could be in a sci-fi movie or do whatever she wanted to do. And she went on to be, Whoopi Goldberg. She's pretty famous. She's done a lot of movies. She's done a lot of comedy shows. And so without that experience of seeing a Black American woman in the role of Aurora, her life might have turned out differently. And she uses this example all the time. So I like to showcase that. Be sure that we are choosing books in our library that show all cultures in heroic, entrepreneurial, leadership roles, where it's not just the dominant culture, because it's good for everyone to see all cultures in favorable positions. So make sure you're being culturally responsive in your classroom and choose those answer choices on the exam. Now remember, when I talk about good words, I'm talking about good practices that you should use in your classroom. It's not just about passing the test. It's also about being an awesome teacher. And so if you live by these good words and practices, you'll be an amazing teacher in the classroom too, and your students will benefit. Now, along with good words, we want to make sure that we are looking at bad words as well. Being sure that we are eliminating the bad words. And I'm going to give you some words to be on the lookout for to avoid in answer choices. All right. So my first set of bad words is extra homework. Do we use extra homework? For sure. Do we send students home with at-home practice? Yes. I'm not anti-homework, okay? But on this test and in life, extra homework is really not going to help struggling learners. All right, so typically on this test, they'll attach extra homework to struggling learners, and it's not going to be your best answer choice, so eliminate it. Another and ironic set of bad words that you want to stay away from on this test is multiple choice test. Typically, they will attach a multiple choice test answer choice to struggling learners or where you're trying to get an authentic measure of something. And multiple choice tests usually are not the best idea for that. So stay away from that on the exam. The next set of bad words that you want to stay away from on the exam is extrinsic rewards. So pizza parties, extra time in the library, candy, cookies, those types of things are extrinsic rewards, and we want to stay away from them on this exam because on this exam, we want students to have intrinsic value in their learning. So we want to be sure that we are focusing on the intrinsic value of learning. Now, do Jolly Ranchers work? Do cookies work? Does extra social time at the end of class work to get your students to sit down, be quiet, and do their work? Yes. Have I used it? Absolutely. And so will you. But on this exam, and really in life, extrinsic rewards are not sustainable, so we want to stay away from them when it comes to the most appropriate answer choice. The next set of bad words that you want to eliminate in your answer choices are going to be anything negative or punitive. So you might get some answer choices that have to do with, sending a student to the office, calling his or her parents to let the parents know about the behavior. And while sometimes we do that, we want to stay away from that on the test. Remember, positive behavior support works better than punitive measures. And there's a ton of research out there to support it. Now, I know many of us grew up where you listen to the teacher and that's it. And you sit down and you shut up and that's what you do when you go to school. But we know now that students have different needs, they have different behavior nuances, and we want to make sure that we're using positive behavior support where we focus on the positives and ignore the negatives, and don't do anything too negative in the classroom because it can be damaging to the student and the learning environment for other students. Now, do you want to pull your hair out some days and send kids to the office? For sure. There are no perfect kids and there are no perfect teachers, but research shows that positive behavior support works far better than, sending kids to the office, assigning extra homework for being bad, detentions, things like that. Positive behavior support is sustainable and provides that intrinsic value for students to behave in class. Takes a lot of practice, but it is certainly better. So stay away from anything negative on the exam because it's typically not the answer. Another set of bad words or bad practices you want to stay away from in life and on this test are English-only practices. Now, I have researched this plenty in my graduate work, and I'm sure many of you have too. Bilingual education is the best way to help students learn a new language. And that's where you support the home language or the first language and you implement the second language. Simply telling students to speak only English in the classroom or only permitting students to speak English in the classroom does not help in English language acquisition. It actually makes it harder on the student, and it's just kind of nasty to do in a classroom. You are going to have students from all different cultures and they're going to speak different languages, and that's okay. You should support that. Don't think that the students are talking about you. They have better things to do with their time, and don't think that they're being disrespectful just because they're talking with their friend in Spanish or Creole or whatever, language that they speak. They may just need that extra support in their home language before they start branching out and becoming fluent in English. So please just say no to English only practices in your instruction and on this exam. It's not the answer on the exam for a reason, because it doesn't work. So bilingual education is where it's at. Let's be tolerant in the classroom and help all students acquire English. Another set of bad words you want to stay away from is anything that has to do with homogeneous or homogeneous grouping. And that's where you take all the same level students and put them in a group and keep them there, right? So all your level 1 students are here. All your level 2 students are here. All your level 3 students are here. You want to stay away from that kind of practice because it homogenizes the learning environment. And research shows that when students are integrated, where you have different levels kind of learning from each other, they do a better job. Now, do you sometimes have to homogenize your groups in order to prescribe interventions? Yes. Sometimes you need to take a group of students who are all having the same issue and focus just on those kids in that moment of time. But it should be temporary. It should not be their permanent position for the entire school year, the entire quarter, or the entire semester. Those students should be working with all other students in the classroom because everyone benefits in that situation. So we do have to group homogeneously sometimes, but temporarily. It should not be your main practice in grouping. And the last set of bad words you want to stay away from on this test are vocab copying from a dictionary. Now, many of us grew up copying the words out of the dictionary, writing them over and over again, flipping to the back of the book and doing glossary work while our teachers kind of took a break and we sat there and did, 25 vocab words from the glossary. It does not work when it comes to vocab acquisition. We want to use vocab in context. Remember, that was on the good words list. So on the bad words list is any kind of copying words or, writing down words over and over and over again. Now, I do believe repetition does work, and I do believe memorization has a place in education for sure. Kids have to memorize their math facts. Sometimes they have to memorize sight words and vocab too. But as a vocabulary strategy for students to acquire, high level vocab and, tough words, copying from a dictionary is not effective. So make sure you stay away from that. And sometimes on this test, you might gravitate towards some of the practices that you grew up doing. And I've seen this a lot with people who are career changers. They go in to take the professional education exam or the principles of learning and teaching, the Praxis PLT, and they choose scenarios that they grew up going through. So copying words out of the dictionary or getting sent to the principal's office when they do something bad. But you want to stay away from that, especially for those of you who have your background in the military. You will often choose, that very military kind of type answer choice. No, go with the opposite, okay? We want authentic, engaging, welcoming, loving learning experiences where the focus is on the student and where it is about positive behavior and not punitive measures. So just keep that in mind. Copying from a dictionary is typically never the right answer on this exam. All right, so I hope that clears things up for you when it comes to good words, bad words. This strategy has helped so many people pass their professional education test, the Praxis PLT, the FEELI, the SLLA, all kinds of tests where you have those big scenario type questions, okay? And that is gonna help you identify the answer choices on the exam quickly and efficiently, and you won't get bogged down in the language. You can go right straight to those answer choices, pick out those good words, and be on your way to passing the exam. Thank you so much for watching today. Have an awesome day, and don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends about our YouTube channel. We're here to help teachers. Have an awesome day.